Grammar Lesson 66, using commas. In this video, I'm going to go over a number of different scenarios where commas are used, and you're going to have to know all of these to be able to complete your exercises for Lesson 66 today. So pay close attention because there are lots of different times when you need to use a comma. So the first scenario we're going to look at is commas in a series, and a series just really means a list of things. So anytime that you are listing things and there are more than two things, you go into the zone of three things, you need to use commas to set off that list. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. Be sure your letter is brief, courteous, and correct. Notice that we have a comma here and here to show that those are separate items in a list. Okay, so anytime you have three or more items being listed, you need to separate the items with commas. One thing to note, and that's why I have a second example here, is that in the first example, we were listing three words, but it doesn't necessarily mean when you're listing things that you put commas after every word in your list. It's three things, three or more things, right? So the children went sledding, comma, made snowmen, comma, and drank hot chocolate. Okay, so even though made snowmen is more than one word, it's one thing in the list. So that's something to pay attention to as well. The next example, or the next scenario, is something that should be familiar. It actually lines up quite nicely with what we've been doing in writing. So remember that when you are making a compound sentence, really what you're doing is you're putting two simple sentences together, and you need to have a good, strong connection in between them. So one of the connections that you can use is a comma conjunction. Okay, so in the first example, cake is John's favorite dessert, comma, but Mark prefers pie. So we have a comma and then we have a conjunction to connect those two simple sentences together to make a compound sentence. Or another example, we went to the store, comma, and she stayed home. Okay, and remember from writing class, we did a lot of talking about how you need to have both the comma and the conjunction there. Otherwise, it's a run-on sentence. So that's a good thing to keep in mind for writing as well. Next example, this is also something that we have done in writing before, is that when you are quoting somebody or when somebody is speaking, so in writing you think more of a character that is talking, you need to use commas. Okay, so we can have commas in a couple of different places. So if I start out with words that are not the talking, so here, Miss Nyhoff often says we need to have a comma before we have our direct quotation of wait and see. Okay, but if we sort of flip the sentence around and we have the said Miss Nyhoff at the end, we're finding out who's doing the talking, we need to put a comma right after what I have said. Please do your work well. You have to have a comma before you can say said so-and-so or exclaimed so-and-so or whatever it is, or however the person is talking. Okay, so just make sure that you have commas in both of those places when you're using direct quotations or when somebody's talking. Another one that should be familiar, because we had a grammar lesson on it not too long ago, is that you have to use a comma when you are using a mild interjection. Now remember, you can use exclamation points as well, like if you were doing help or, I don't know, some other strong emotion interjection. But for these ones, they're pretty mild. They're not showing a big strong emotion. So here we can just use commas. Oh, I see. So O is the interjection, and then we have a comma after it. Or no, I have not finished my homework yet. You use just a comma. Okay, so commas with interjections, that's just a review. Now, a couple more here. If you are addressing somebody specifically in your sentence, so in the sentence, Bob, did you understand the math lesson? Bob, or the name, needs to have a comma after it. Okay? Or if the name of the person you're addressing is coming at the end, that means we have to have a comma before it. What do we have to do today, comma, Miss Nyhoff? So the comma goes in front of the name if it's coming at the end of the sentence. Okay, so when you're directly addressing somebody in your sentence, That's a clue that you need to have a comma. Now, the last one, we are talking about appositives here, and it's been a long time since we've talked about appositives in grammar. We have, though, so hopefully it sounds familiar. But an appositive is really just something that renames a noun, or we usually talked about it giving more information about the noun. Okay, so in this, let's look at the first example sentence. My neighbor's cat, Mittens, keeps pooping in my yard. Mittens is an appositive because mittens is giving me more information about the noun cat. Okay, and the way you can test that things are appositives is if you could remove them from the sentence, would it still make sense? Would it still make sense to say, my neighbor's cat keeps pooping in my yard? Yes, it does, but the appositive gives more information because my neighbor actually has more cats than one, and it's one specific one that actually in real life is pooping in my yard. So the specific cat that's pooping in my yard, that cat's name is Mittens. That is the appositive. Okay? In the second example here, Dr. Smith, the dentist, is on vacation. Well, the dentist is renaming or giving more information about Dr. Smith. That is the appositive. And notice that the appositives have to have commas around them. That's called being offset with commas. Okay, so anytime you see an appositive, which is a word or perhaps words giving more information about a noun or renaming that noun, they need to have commas around them. And that is it. That's all the scenarios you're going to need to know for today's grammar lesson. If you need a couple more examples or if you would like my help, please reach out to me.